Okay, Sean, I want to welcome you to the show today.
Thanks, Bill. Great to be here.
So my guess is you always had an aspiration ever since you've been a young child of being a CIO and a CISO for a major company in the United States.
I've always had a deep love for technology and a knack for leadership. So I know I've been doing it for quite a while at this time. So actually, it has been a bit of a dream.
Has it been? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I just never know where where people's ambitions start. But where did your first interest in technology come from? I'd love to see the genesis of that, and then your genesis of leadership.
God, it goes back to when I was a kid, even. I remember developing, I don't want to date myself, but I was developing choose your own adventure games on old IBM machines when I was a kid. I've always loved it. And it turns out that it's a great place to be from a career perspective. And I feel amazingly lucky to get to be involved in something that I love as my life's career. And I think the other thing I'll say that developed was early on, I learned about technical writing and talking and communicating, and to be able to not only do technology, but also communicate it about it made it just a natural evolution that I evolved into technology leadership. I've been doing it for, over 20 years now, and loving it, the whole journey.
It's interesting, writing and people always wonder, they think I've got a real technical, degree, comp sci background. And I told them I was an English literature major. And they're like, well, what does that have to do with technology? I said, well, have you ever tried to deconstruct Beowulf and ancient languages? I said, yeah, I can make it digestible for the regular human beings. I said, isn't that what communicating about technology is in business?
Right, yeah. And exactly. And if you can communicate and write about it and talk about it, it's a huge step forward.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think what really attracted me to the conversation we're going to have today is about this theme. Knowing, first of all, you're both the CIO and CISO for Wiley. How did you start out with one or the other? Or did you inherit one title? How did that happen?
It was just the need they had, Bill, I get the privilege of handling both of those roles and spanning across them. I was at a conference the other day, and they were talking about how you rectify the conflict between the CIO and the CISO. And I'm going, well, I just talked to myself here. So it's actually, and it's been really, I think, great and beneficial to bring these groups together, especially, and I think we're going to get into this discussion later on, with a view into DevSecOps, right? As we look to build both technology and security as something that's not solely the domain of a operations team or a security team, as we kind of democratize that, it makes a lot of sense to bring these two things together. So, so frankly, the Wiley, the leadership at Wiley had a need for the two of those that they felt I could fill, and here I am.
That's great. That's great. Well, one of the big themes of this is the focus on offense and defense innovation, and so clearly, DevSecOps fits into. A lot of businesses just want to deploy new capabilities, and they want to deploy them faster. And then we had to balance that out with securing that as well. And so how do you balance the need for new capabilities for Wiley, and then also the need for governance at the same time? How does that play in your brain and your actions?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, and I've been in the DevOps world for quite a while. In fact, before Wiley, I was running my own global company, helping other companies do DevOps, right? And of course, DevSecOps, I feel like we keep jamming new words in there. But DevSecOps is a component of DevOps and an extension of DevOps. And I think there's a very natural and wonderful answer to the question of how do you balance it, which is when we look at compliance or policy as from a DevOps perspective, from a DevSecOps perspective, we want to make the policy and compliance as light as possible. And this is coming from a CISO, right? So I am not one who's going to increase policy and process for the sake of process and compliance. But the other focus there is on automation and building it as part of what you do every day rather than something you strap on after the fact, right? So it isn't that we're going to test security into the process. It's that we're going to build it in and build it through automation. And the wonderful thing there, Bill, is that when that happens, you don't have to slow down to do security. You don't have to say, okay, we're about to deploy, everybody stop everything. We're going to take a month to do a security audit, right? You can say, no, if it's been deployed, it's secure by design. And that's a really exciting place to be.
So how do you, just if we could unpack the word automation, I'd love to know what you mean by that. Because I wholeheartedly agree. It's, if we don't, I mean, the days of a 3-ring binder security assessment are done. Like we need that, the always on security, it's to be always on. But let's unpack the word automation. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so it's a good question because there's so many pieces to that, right? But I think in particular, I'll give 2 pieces of it. One is securing the deployment so that you're secure by design, right? And this is, we talk a lot about shift left and how do we ensure that you're finding out about security as early on in the process. So when developers are developing code, they're not just getting warnings in their IDE, in their development environment about, syntax errors. They're getting warnings about, hey, potential exposures to different security issues, right? So if we can get them fixed before the code's even checked in, that's ideal, right? And that's a piece of it. So securing the code, but then as it's checked in, right, automating the pipeline so that you're automatically running your security tests, so that when it gets to production, it's already secure by design, right? But then that doesn't mean you don't need to check, right? That doesn't mean you don't need to do governance and compliance, but governance and compliance provides a whole nother set of opportunities for automation. And there's, I'm not sure, we can get into it in more detail, but around compliance and governance, there's a whole nother set of opportunities that we can realize there as well.
So what you're saying is the code is developed securely up front and prior to checking. So it's
yes.
Okay. And is that something that you recommend we just run through an automated tool to check the code right up front, or is it depending on the individuals? No, there's a few places where you need to check that, right? One is while they're developing the code, so even before it's checked in, it's been through some security. Then there's, hey, we check in, we're doing our merge. Part of your testing, your automated testing, that's part of your continuous integration and continuous deployment pipeline needs to also be security tested. And look, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying, and then we're done. Yep, everything that went out there can have a flaw, right? There's all sorts of other places you can have it, including the infrastructure, including the way that different pieces of that code are working together. What I am saying is that, and I think this is part of DevOps, is really empowering people to do it
and doing it as part of what you do, right? So it's something we all do. It isn't something that just the security team at Wiley is responsible for. Security is everyone in technology's responsibility, right? And it's a shared responsibility. And as such, we need to share that. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff we can do after it's deployed and need to continue to do to secure the different layers of our applications and services.
So you wrote this great article and with a collaborator on DevSecOps or DevOps for pandemics, and that was pretty cool because I think that really pushes the whole thesis around what you're trying to do. Maybe you could talk about what Wiley experienced from the new offense capabilities that you needed, and then how this environment was really productive for you as a result, and the people around it.
Yeah. So I guess there's a few things to unpack there, right? First of all, I worked on this article with Sia, who is one of the development leads at Wiley, and it was really great. And I think it emphasizes the collaboration that it's at the core to DevOps, right? And I definitely encourage folks to get out there and have a look at the article. But the highest level, what I love about DevOps, what I love about DevSecOps is that fundamentally, if we work together, we can move faster and more securely. And what a cool concept is that? Like, it isn't about this tool. It isn't about a bunch of elbow grease. It's about collaboration. And fundamentally, as we collaborate better, we can deliver much better value to the market, much more quicker, much more securely. And fundamentally, that's an amazing thing for me. And a wonderful thing to do. I mean, we talked at the beginning about how to get into this. I certainly love the fact that I've got it into something that lets me work on collaboration amongst humans, right? As a technologist. That's pretty cool. Now, the other piece you asked about is kind of the offense capabilities and how that relates to COVID-19 and the pandemic and the many of the challenges we're struggling. I think from a pandemic perspective, you've got to think about what's fundamentally changed. And one of the biggest things that's changed is really where our workforce is, right? Yeah. And how that continues to push the boundaries of our security threat and the threat vectors, right? Really, we saw two things. One was, okay, now everyone's home network is part of the threat landscape we need to be aware of, including the printer they've got, including, all their Siri or Google Home devices, right? Including their smart TV. That's now all things we need to be worried about. So we see the expansion of that. We also saw an increase in phishing attempts related to the pandemic, and people are obviously playing up to those fears. But at Wiley, what we saw was, again, that we were by building in advance for remote workers, many of the things we put in place there were very much able to expand. It was just a matter of scaling. And because we had built smart, adaptive systems, we were able to do that seamlessly, getting our employees to work from home in a secure way in days, which was just amazing. Sorry, go ahead, Bill.
So as far as the DevOps environment that you put together, is it when you have this force of so you have new capabilities that Wiley wants, and then is there a speed to market that you're able to achieve now that you didn't have before? Or I'd love for you to comment to that if there's kind of a new offense capability that you're able to obtain from this.
Yeah, certainly. So I think speed to market is one of the keys, right? But the other piece of that is it used to be this trade-off decision that we had to make. Hey, do you want to go fast or do you want to go stable? Right. And now using CI/CD, using infrastructure as code, we can do both. And that's kind of the promise we've been digging at as technologists for my entire career, right? Is how do we move fast and securely and stably, and we can deliver them both. And you see this, I mean, in response to the pandemic specifically, as an educational technology company, right? We saw our users switching very quickly, and many of our educational platforms, we saw tremendous growth, right? So really, as students went from learning in the classroom to learning at home, a lot of our platforms, which were designed for that, are seeing this huge growth. And we were able, because we were running with CI/CD and elastic infrastructure, to scale up to meet that demand. And in the one or two cases we go through in detail, some of the one of the issues we saw, where there was one known issue that cropped up when you doubled and tripled the load on that system. But we were able to, using CI/CD, push out a change within days to address that and really continue to improve the performance. So yeah.
And for those that don't know what CI/CD is, just give a little overview, just a brief.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Bill. Continuous integration and continuous deployment. So it's just the process of building your applications on a continuous basis and then deploying it to production on a continuous basis. I mean, more specifically, continuous deployment generally focuses on being on a continually deployable state, and then making the decision, do we deploy that or not? Right.
Now, are you using, obviously that's a quite agile framework, but are you using agile, or are you using like Kanban? What are you using for a deployment process methodology?
Yeah, Wiley is very focused on agile. We're in this amazingly transformative time. Another reason I love being part of Wiley is because we are going through, I think, 4 major transformations right now, right?
Wow.
And given and continuing to produce great products and services. And I think that's probably also one of the reasons they brought me in. But one of those transformations is agile. We've been at it for a long time, but really in a much more focused way for the past couple of years. And now I'm working with the CIO team to really make sure we're advancing that in operations and platform engineering and all of those teams as well.
That's great. So as it relates to for security and compliance, as I think you were going down a track of compliance a little earlier, and then I kind of sidetracked it a bit. But I'd love to know. So you've got this speed capability now with this agile process, but then you've got essentially this invisible framework. I'm going to call it invisible. It's not invisible, but I'd love to know how you break that apart. And I have a couple of security questions, but I know you have a compliance as code mantra that you follow. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. It's a big focus for me. I'll tell you one of the reasons. I won't tell you where this happened, but I will tell you that at one point I found myself in a SOX compliance war room. There were some SOX issues. We weren't where we needed to be. And I found myself for a week in a war room going through evidence and manually going through piece by piece and collecting. And enterprise environment, you have many different applications, many different ways of doing things, right? And especially in companies where you grow by acquisition, that may not be coherent across all of your different applications and services. So I sat in this room and one by one people came in and it was like, okay, we need your evidence about how you're managing change. And they say, okay, well, we've got this, we do it in Jira. And another team came in and said, oh yeah, we do it all in ServiceNow. And another team said, yeah, we've got it all in email, and they're pulling out old emails and going through server logs. And I really felt to myself, I never want to do this again, right?
I love this story. I think this is great. So basically, the socks problem, you discovered it.
Right. It was not so great at the time, right? But it certainly explains one of the reasons that I am so focused on compliance, automation, and compliance as code. And I think those are two separate but related pieces, right? Because I thought to myself, there's got to be a better way to do this. And I looked to, some of the thought leaders in DevOps, right? In that space, look to, articles by folks like Gene Kim, who are writing a defensive audit, and Patrick Dubois, and those folks. And there's a focus there on automation and using CICD as that defining line rather than using people. But I find that it actually has to start more fundamentally, right? Where you look at, hey, what are the core processes? And if you look at change, which is one of them that you're always going to be audited on, right? There's a fundamental building block there where if you can set that the same across your entire organization, you're going to take leaps forward. The other is IAM, identity and access management, and identity governance, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't have those nailed down in the same way, collecting that evidence is going to be really hard, right? And one of the things I dislike almost most about that is the people who were sitting in the war room with me were great engineers. You know what they were doing? Not engineering. They weren't developing products. They weren't making innovations to get out to market. They were tracking down old emails, right? So if we can set those basic building blocks and then develop a framework to track your tests for audit, and then automate those, there's an opportunity here to save millions, not only millions, but to save the time of your engineers to focus on building better products, getting to market quicker, and not running around and collecting evidence. And that for me is invaluable and a very exciting thing to be thinking about and working on.
Yeah, I'm taking lots of notes as you talk, because I think that's a big part of this is we're going to use human beings to gather evidence or use them to build more offensive capabilities for the company and service customers. And so it's a wonderful, so necessity breeds innovation. So that's essentially what happened. So now did you, are you using some third-party tools or do you build your own related to this, this compliance as code?
Yeah, so we're certainly using tools. It's interesting. It is very much a developing marketplace, but we focus we use ServiceNow, we use OneTrust for governance and compliance, where we're building out our governance frameworks, relating risks to that.
Okay.
And we'll then be doing a lot of, I think, for evidence gathering, that will be more custom, right? Because that's really dependent on the different pieces of evidence. But also something where if you're using these same systems and ways of doing things like change, it becomes just rinse and repeat for every application. Hey, how do we know this change was tracked? Well, look on the this server log. Okay, well, maybe it's just another server you're looking at, but the test is basic, or the evidence collection is basically the same.
So is this going to be using, is this using like a machine learning, or is it much more formulaic than that, because you're sort of looking for known entities? You don't need to kind of find the needle.
Yeah, we you actually don't need to be that smart about it, Bill.
Yeah. I didn't think so, but I was
right.
curious.
One of the reasons it's so such a good target for automation is that it is, and again, if you've got the foundations built correctly, it is relatively rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you're looking for
it shouldn't be that nuanced that you need artificial intelligence or real intelligence to do it.
Yeah. And once it's set up correctly, then you can just run it as a regular process.
Yeah, and back to what we were talking about, I mean, not even a process which you run every quarter or once a year, but you can run it on every release or at least parts of it.
Okay. Now, I did have a question about how, from an infrastructure security perspective, and in the CISO, CIO role that you're in, securing those containers as they move, they're sort of, they're elastic and they don't follow the same rules as a kind of traditional on-prem or even co-location environment. So how do you secure these clusters, and in specific the containers that move potentially between clusters?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think that, and it applies to compute as well, where you're talking, I mean, the same problem is there, where you're talking about ephemeral infrastructure that may be there 1 second and may not be there the other second. The approach that we're taking, because we have a large hybrid environment made up of lots of different technologies, as I imagine many enterprises are taking. But I'd say there's two pieces to the approach. One is that we've got to move beyond securing the perimeter, right? And I heard someone else say this. I love it, but a hard, crunchy outside and a soft, chewy inside is not a good security posture. Right? I mean, concept being, we've got to make sure we have security at every layer, right? And multifaceted security approach. So regardless of where the container is spun up or spun down, you have a solid approach to your identity access and governance. You have a solid approach to privileged account management. You have a solid approach to how you're protecting at the edge, at the network, right? And all the layers in between. And so we have our approach where we look at that leaves us very well protected, whether you're in the cloud or in the data center. Yeah. And we're trying to build an environment where fundamentally the concepts that apply to one apply to both. I think the ephemeral nature does mean you need to be thinking about concepts like zero trust and others you can't say, hey, that we know that server, it's okay, right? You can trust it, right? We've always got to be verifying on any transaction or connection because you don't know, because it is continual change. But
I think your point is that something like my narrowly focused question is actually, even though important in the development of security environments, you're actually approaching it from a layered approach. And
that's right.
Doesn't make a layering go away. It just means there's one little area that, I mean, what I loved also about this is how you brought identity management into it. And and I think there's no better way right now. Everybody's working from home. Now everybody has, they're not behind any sort of corporate traditional infrastructures. And now they want to get into all applications, and we don't know we don't have IDM and federated identity set up with all of these providers. And so we don't know from a pure access control who's getting in and all the time. And we don't even have necessarily two-factor turned on everywhere. And so it's quite, from a layering perspective, we start off the conversation with DevOps, but if we don't know who's even getting into the infrastructure, or if that's a problem.
Right. May not matter. Right. Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's a huge one, which impacts everything from governance and defense to also, I mean, offense. And I love talking about that and thinking about it in the broader concept of how do we not just prevent, but actually be a value add to the business. And I think IAM is a great example of that, whether it's making it that much easier for users to get to the resources they need, or even on our customer front to make sure that a user for, dummies.com gets the same experience as a user at wiley.com, and that's seamless, right? And even going beyond just, hey, we've got a great IAM strategy to we're taking it to the next level and allowing people to use like Facebook to authenticate or Google Authenticator and tying into that so we can meet the customers wherever they are while providing the highest level of security.
I see what you're saying. So you're not necessarily saying that you've got to have like an LDAP infrastructure to get in of like Microsoft as your AD. You're meeting them wherever they may be as far as how you develop your apps.
And certainly maybe your LDAP is part of that, or a LDAP, but yes, but that doesn't make other combinations possible and other access methods possible. Yeah.
So as we wrap up, Sean, I wanted to just usually when I ask a question towards the end where something in your subconscious goes off, you're like, man, I hope Bill asked that question, or particularly for the CIO, CISO in the mid-market, most of the CIOs that come on don't really have the luxury of like a Fortune 100, Fortune 200, 500 type of resource pools. So I'd love to know kind of what your message is as we leave. Is there anything in particular that you'd like to share with my audience before you go about the topics we talked about today?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess the one thing that we hit on that we didn't get into a couple of the pieces on was just this concept of offense, right? And I love the idea of, as a CIO as well, being a value add. And, you look at these great examples like AWS, and first it's like, hey, we need infrastructure, right? So they build it out for this online bookseller. And then they say, hey, we're doing this so well, I'll bet other people want it. And look where it is today. It's just incredible. And I think we need to be thinking about that. How do we incrementally add value? And from a security standpoint, as a education and research institution, there are opportunities. So one of those is piracy, which is a big issue for us. We have lots of people distributing content through torrent sites. We have people who are actually spoofing Wiley sites and redistributing content through them. Authors will actually go to fake sites and submit their content and lose any control of that content. And this is a bit scary to me because it impacts researchers and authors, right, who don't get compensated because people aren't thinking, they're just thinking, hey, I want free content. Sure, that's great. But they're not thinking about the researchers and the authors. And they're not thinking about the impact to innovation, where maybe a researcher says, yeah, I'm not going to look into that because my content is getting stolen and there's no compensation there, right? So in doing that, we're actually hampering, if we're allowing piracy, we're actually hampering innovation, we're hampering creativity. And there's a real opportunity for security in partnership with our content creation team to really improve that. And my hope is, and one of the other reasons I love being at Wiley is because we're an educational and research institution. And my hope is that in reducing piracy, we can actually reduce the cost of education and make it more globally available. And what a cool thing to be able to be part of than making education and research more accessible at a lower cost to more people. Like ultimately that's where we get to. We start with, let's talk about CICD and DevSecOps and compliance as code. But when you come out the other end, it's about making the world a better place through education and research. And it's it's a privilege to be able to be part of that and drive that forward through technology.
Yeah, it seems like a huge opportunity for you. I mean, I was listening to a show the other day, and the guy's like, well, do we really need a college education anymore? And the guy was actually the author of Sapiens. So
Okay.
Yuval. Okay. So he sold like, I think 12 million copies of his book. It's just stunning.
Oh.
And he goes, listen, we don't really know. We don't really know the impact of traditional education, but we do know is that you're going to have to continuously learn. You're going to have to continuously learn. And
Right.
so, it couldn't be a better market for Wiley to be in right now. But to your point, I listened to Ballmer talk many years ago at a Microsoft conference. He's like, if we just recovered half of the money of the software licenses that were stolen from us, we would double the size of the company. And so, do you remember those back in the days of Microsoft?
Yeah, absolutely.
On licensing and stuff. And so I think it's a big deal. And all of a sudden now a great defense at Wiley can actually contribute to offense.
Yeah, exactly.
Contribute to top line and profits and drive the whole creative. Obviously now the content creators get paid exponentially, drive the cost down, and maybe have more content creators. And I don't know how you do digital rights management, in your world, but it's certainly a problem worth solving, right?
Right. Well, and there are absolutely lessons we can take from other industries that have dealt with the same problem. You look at music, you look at video. I think there are so many changes, some of them as simple as doing better at digital rights management, some of them about
blockchain,
back to IAM and authentication. But there's a lot of opportunities to basically help drive forward education and research.
What about blockchain for you guys, like a private blockchain?
Certainly something to think about. Not one we're exploring yet, but maybe I'll bring it up with the team.
Yeah, that's that to me seems like from a scalability perspective, the way to scale and have multiple ways to vet that. Now, pure blockchain probably not, but pure blockchain, the way I interviewed this guy on my podcast 3 years ago, Don Tapscott. And he was the top guy in blockchain. He goes, listen, blockchain is just IP of the internet. It's just internet protocol.
Right. Yeah.
Because IP does nothing without applications built on it. But I could see Sean now out there building his own Wiley blockchain app,
I'll get back to you in a couple months and let you know how that's looking.
Listen, as we wrap up, how can people find you online and research you more?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for having me. And I do encourage people to connect with me. I love connecting with others who are passionate about technology, passionate about security. You can find me online on LinkedIn at Sean D. Mack. And you can find me on Twitter at Sean D. Mack NYC. Excellent.
We're going to put that in the show notes. And before I put the show notes out, love to also get any of the key influencers you mentioned. His name, thought leaders, Gene Kim and Patrick Dubois.
Patrick Dubois, yeah.
Yeah, any kind of influencers would be great as you put that out, this show note episode. But this is going to be a gem for everybody. Thank you.
Sounds great.
All right, Sean, have a good rest of your day, and look forward to getting this out into the world.
Excellent. Thanks again for having me, Bill.
You're welcome.